Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Patrick Oates from VPI, and I'll be your host today. I'm also joined by Chief Analyst Dick Bucci from Polaris Associates, and we're glad that you're able to take some of your valuable time out of your day today to join us for this training webcast on call recording compliance, an update on PCI, HIPAA, Dodd-Frank, and some solutions for compliance, particularly to call recording. So just a little bit about Dick Bucci, who's joining us, and myself before we get started. Dick is one of the top analysts in the contact center communication space. He's been in the space for over 25 years. He authors the World Contact Center Interaction Recording Report, so he's very familiar with this space and a lot of the changing technologies and changing regulations. He's staying on top of those. He has an MBA from Case Western and a bachelor's from Kent State University. My name is Patrick Oates. I've been with VPI for 12 years now, and been helping over 100 clients with not only compliance recording, but also passionate about quality assurance and workforce optimization. I recently co-authored a series of books with Dick Bucci, one which will be coming out here very shortly, focused on contact center workforce optimization. And went to get my engineering degree from Arizona State and an MBA from Pepperdine, just a little bit out west. So a little bit about VPI before we get started. We were founded 20 years ago. We're headquartered in Southern California. We're one of the fastest growing call recording workforce optimization providers in the industry today. We're U.S. based with U.S. based development, and all our major primary support offices are based out of the U.S., and we have global partners and support offices as well. More than 1,000 customers, and really what we do is we provide a unified suite of modular solutions. So you can mix and match these solutions as you grow and as there's a need in your organization. So everything kind of gets pulled together in our business intelligence dashboards, but we pull information from a variety of places and provide a wide variety of WFO tools as well. So if you have any questions, we're looking forward to answering them. We will try to answer as many questions as we can in the allotted 1 hour time period. And if you have any, just enter them into the question dialog box in the bottom right-hand corner, and we'll get to them, or as many as we can during the presentation. So just a disclaimer before we get started. So neither Dick nor myself are attorneys, so just want to let you know that this is for educational purposes, not to provide legal advice. You definitely want to check with your legal counsel and verify anything that is presented here before you make any major adjustments. But so the opinions are not, VPI's or Polaris Associates or Dick's or myself, but we're trying to provide you with as much education as possible today. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Dick Bucci, who will go through a lot of the recent updates. We're going to start with Dodd-Frank, and then we'll get into the CFPB. We'll also touch PCI, HIPAA, and the telemarketing sales rule as well.
Well, thank you, Patrick, and thanks to all of you in attendance. Before I get into Dodd-Frank, let me just say a word or two about regulation and legal environment in general. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of state and federal laws and regulations that can impact the contact center. Here we're addressing a few of them. If I had to summarize what do they do, well, in three simple basic statements: they attempt to prevent fraud, they attempt to stop abuse, and they serve to protect individual privacy. And there are a lot that goes around that, but those are three basic requirements of the laws that we will be addressing. We'll start with the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. As shown here, the act went into effect in July of 2010, and it was a reaction to something we all remember not very fondly, and that was the collapse of financial markets, the need for the government to bail out major institutions and manufacturing companies, and obviously our leaders did not want to see a recurrence of this, so Dodd-Frank took some time to put together. It's a very in-depth, long piece of legislation, but it addresses many of the underlying forces which led to the financial collapse of the 2008 to 2010 period. It's administered by the Financial Stability Oversight Council and chaired by the Secretary of the Treasury. And it's very broad. CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, is an artifact of that law. And so combined, we address virtually every element of consumer financial exposure that individual would encounter. The Act itself, which I've been through, not every word, but too many of them, 848 pages, and that's not counting the additional 10,000 pages of rulemaking that has followed it since then. I can go to the next chart. Okay, just a few key provisions of Dodd-Frank. One is the requirement to disclose proprietary funds if you have a limited range of investment vehicles. One of the problems that was leading up to the financial collapse was some financial advisors and other financial professionals were not disclosing to potential customers that they were representing or got better commissions from particular funds, or maybe their own company had a proprietary fund which they would be promoting. And that must now be made known to anybody that is a prospective customer of financial services. There are a lot of detailed revelations that need to be made for credit card applications, home mortgages, even home appraisals. This is to combat the fact that customers were misled, given partial information, erroneous information, not told about special interest rates changes or special fees or requirements to buy insurance and all this, which was not upfront. Any material conflict of interest needs to be disclosed, and such as we talked about earlier. If you're representing yourself as a financial advisor, then if you have a conflict, maybe you're already invested in a particular security which you're trying to sell, that needs to be made known. Also, your qualifications. There are various accrediting bureaus for financial advisors and stockbrokers and other financial people. If they have these qualifications, then they better be accurate. They can't say they're accredited when unless the facts back that up. And finally, of course, there's discriminations on the basis of race, sex, and ethnic group. Go on to the next one here. Dodd-Frank and recording. Just about all the financial trading floors, major ones, tend to record all the interactions. This is not just because of law, but for the company's own protection, so we don't get in a situation of a particular customer, disputing whether or not a trade was executed according to their instructions. And specifically in the event of swaps trading, the pre-execution trade information has to be recorded. In fact, the entire transactions from beginning to end, and this means the ability to piece together the transaction afterwards. So if there's any dispute, we'll know what was said, when, what paper was exchanged, what emails or chat conversations transpired. These records must be made available for reconstruction of the trade for up to 5 years, and they must be searchable for 3 years. We talked about swaps, and just understand that the swaps industry isn't just strictly financial services. There's swaps trading that goes on in energy and agriculture and manufacturing and other arenas as well. And recently, there's been an addition to the law to require recording of mobile communications, since so much is transacted over mobile phones these days. There are similar laws in Europe requiring recording of mobile conversations. I mentioned earlier that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is an artifact of Dodd-Frank. And this is a very significant piece of legislation, certainly the most significant financial protection legislation ever put into effect by Congress. This is a very powerful organization. We'll talk about some of its powers and resources in a minute. But it's important to understand that CFPB has administrative responsibility for virtually all the federal laws that have to do with consumer financial affairs. We list 3 of them here: for Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, Fair Credit Reporting, Fair Debt Collections Practices Act, but there's 12 others. So this is an important source of CFPB's power, because heretofore these individual laws were administered by sometimes different organizations with different amounts of support or emphasis. The CFPB and laws that it administers covers virtually all consumer finance activities. Much of the publicity has to do with mortgages and credit cards, since that's the largest component of financial affairs, along with student loans. But it also affects payday lenders, it affects auto dealers, any company that's extending financial services to individuals. There's no limit to the size of the company, so everyone's business could be affected by this. It's a large organization with a budget of $580 million, over 1,000 employees. The director of the CFPB is appointed by the president. Some of its influence comes from its ability to simplify reporting. If there's a complaint, all one needs to do is go to the CFPB website, enter some data, and it's there. To date, there's been almost 500,000 submissions for actually about 400,000 complaints submitted between July 2011 and June of 2014, and they're coming in at the rate of 15,000 to 20,000 per month. There's protections for whistleblowers, and some whistleblowers, they do get compensated if in a successful suit, and some earn millions of dollars through unveiling violations. This chart here shows the distribution of the complaints that they're getting. Mortgages represents about half of the complaints that were submitted. Student loans, only about 4% when this chart was put together, though I suspect it'll start to grow as it's reported there's about $1.5 trillion out in student loans, which will soon eclipse home mortgages, and there's been a number of complaints, a growing number of complaints, particularly about collection practices with student loans. Here's some examples of some of the fines that have been assessed. In the first 2 years of the CFPB's formation, over $500 million, I think closer to $600 million in fines and penalties were assessed. So it's a powerful organization, and they are, responsive to complaints by consumers. I won't read all these. You can take a second to look at them, but the numbers are big. Here's an example of a wireless carrier being fined $25 million, mortgage servicer for $63 million. Much of this is for false representations. Good examples with credit cards. Too often people are told or expected, not or surprised to learn that they have to pay for insurance, or that the credit card interest rate will change, very shortly. So the CFPB is meant to, police that type of activity. Now we're going to move for a couple minutes into the telemarketing sales rule. This is certainly the largest, most pervasive piece of legislation impacting the contact center industry. It was intended to halt abuses. There were so many complaints to elected officials about telemarketing calls at all hours, and finally the Federal Trade Commission put together legislation that was approved. It was passed in 2003, and later that year the popular do not call provision was added. I believe that was in September 2003. And then more recently in 2009 there were prohibitions against robocalls implemented. The requirements of the telemarketing sales rule are imposed by just about every business to consumer call. There are some significant exemptions, such as for private charities, and as we probably all know by now, even from politicians who are, for whatever reason, and their wisdom, they decided to exempt political fundraising calls. But by and large, calls from business to consumers are regulated by the TSR, and this includes calls that are become upsells. When someone calls us on a service call and the agent suggests new products and services, now it becomes a sales call, and it is subject to the requirements and restrictions of the TSR. Since the federal law applies only to interstate calls, so most local companies are not impacted by this. Some significant terms let me mention is the need for material information. All material information must be shared. Material information is defined to include any information that's relevant or pertinent to making a purchase decision, which is certainly very broad, and the TSR actually spells out 7 or 8 specific components. Mandatory disclosures. When a telemarketer calls, they must identify the call as a sales call. They must identify what organization they represent. And express verifiable authorization in certain instances when a purchase is made by a means other than a debit or credit card. There needs to be a factual evidence of that the customer approves that purchase, and this could be in the form of a recorded message. And so, every telemarketer company and companies that do upsells should, employ a means of recording to prove that, the proper information was provided and that the customer did in fact select to make the purchase decision. PCI DSS is a very big topic these days. We're all aware of the problems with identity theft. The payment card industry formed a standards body. Several years ago, the payment card industry is made up of 5 major card brands: American Express, Discover, JCPenney, MasterCard, and Visa. Those were the founding members. The standards are intended to, halt potential security lapses. These standards get modified from time to time. There are certain rules, very specific rules, especially during recording. The telemarketer or the person on the end of the phone should not be recording the actual card number. So when a comes to a point in the purchase transaction that the card number is requested, then there must be a pause or some means of making sure that that number is not recorded. If the numbers are stored, and they can be for certain purposes, they must be encrypted. And certain types of data, such as the security code on the back of the card and anything on the magnetic stripe, cannot be stored at all, even if encrypted. So, and these rules are very rigorous, and failure to comply with those rules can be very costly, particularly specific. The most powerful clout is the ability of the card provider to withdraw card privileges. There are no federal laws requiring PCI DSS compliance, but there are 3 state laws now that require either all or portions of the DSS, of the standard, and 46 states that have their own data breach legislation in place. Here are the fines. You can see they are very substantial. $50 to $90 per card holder, possible civil litigation. But perhaps the biggest cost of all is the loss of reputation and perhaps potential loss of card privileges. Health Insurance Portability and Accounting Act is another major law that we're going to talk a little bit about. The privacy rule is intended to guarantee that personally identifiable health information is not made public, and the Act specifies what that information is or is listed and how it must be protected at all times. The HIPAA affects 3 categories: healthcare providers, people that insure healthcare, clearinghouses such as companies that do billing, collections, etc. And very important from the contact center industry, it extends to business associates, and many health companies deploy outsourced contact centers. These are defined as associates, and there are specific contracts which HIPAA recommends, spelling out that the business associate is required to comply with the HIPAA law, and failure to do so could be traced back to the original party that retained the business associate. Fines can be very substantial. We list some of them here. As much as 1.4 million people have had their health information compromised. The fines we're showing range from $2 to $5 million, and they could be much higher. And in many cases, we try to, when there are lapses, they're more accidental. But this is very important, and it applies very broadly, since virtually every business that is either touched by or by the healthcare industry. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Patrick, who will be talking to specific technologies and best practices that can help you in your efforts to comply with the myriad laws that impact telephone sales and telephone service activities.
Great. Thank you so much, Dick. That's fantastic information. We got some great questions that are coming in, and one of them in particular is, will these slides be made available? And yes, absolutely. So we will send you the slides as well as links to the recording for anyone on your team that wasn't able to attend. And Dick also recently authored a fantastic complimentary guidebook on navigating call recording law, which covers this and other regulations as well. So I will send you a link to download that as well. So I'm really looking forward to sharing some best practices and solutions with you. The majority of our customers do have to comply with one or more of the requirements and regulations that Dick just went through. So that's what we do. We help our customers on a daily basis, comply with those demands. And I'm just going to share some of the best practices that we recommend and that our customers have found valuable as well. So the first one is to tag more data to your call recording. So typically when you're recording calls, you're connected to the phone system, right, whether it be Cisco, Avaya, or whatever phone system you're using, and you're tagging the agent ID, maybe the incoming phone number, the time of that call, the date, whether it's inbound, outbound. You really don't have too much information to help you find those calls, right? Easily find calls. So a lot of times in compliance environments, you need to recreate these incidents or recreate things, and it takes quite a while, a lot of effort to find everything related to that if you just have limited data tagged to the call. So we highly recommend, not only for compliance purposes, but just productivity purposes and business intelligence purposes, is just connecting to your CRM system or your help desk system or your claims system while you're recording calls. Then what it does, the recording system will actually tag all the information, such as account number, case ID. Maybe you want to track what's going on with new products that you're launching. You can tag the name of the product that shows up in the agent screen to the call, the disposition codes, notes, anything that you'd want to search on to find those calls quicker. It also helps for quality assurance because you can now use those in your rules to schedule certain types of calls that are more valuable for quality assurance. So you'll see that all the data and the events that you want captured from your CRM system or whatever application, it could be a homegrown system that you use, that actually gets tagged to the call recording. Again, it can be used for searches. It can be used for your quality monitoring rules. It can also be used for archiving rules. How long do you want to keep certain calls for what period of time? You can do it based on any of the data that's tagged to the call, right? So there's certain organizations, they don't want to keep certain types of calls 1 second longer than they have to, right? So as soon as they're able to archive them, they will. And then there's some that want to keep them for a longer period of time, and you can set those. So a big thing with PCI, especially PCI, but also HIPAA, as more and more organizations are implementing the pause and resume. And PCI actually requires that you don't capture that sensitive credit card information, right? That 3-digit PIN, anything else in the magnetic stripe, right? So what you're essentially doing is using that same, we call it VPI Fact Finder, but it's essentially a desktop analytics connector, or a connector to your CRM system through an API, or we may look at a copy of your database, your CRM system database, or if there's a specific URL that shows up. If you have maybe a Salesforce.com or some sort of cloud application where there's a specific, it's a web-based application where the agents see a specific URL, we can say, hey, at this point, they're either going into this screen, they're hitting this URL, whatever it may be, we're going to pause the recording at that point. And then when they leave that screen where they're entering credit card information or patient private information, in the case of HIPAA, you can resume recording because you don't want to be storing that information. So it used to be okay just to encrypt your calls, but that's not good enough. As Dick mentioned, they have the new 3.1 PCI requirement out, which essentially you either transfer the call off at that point to an automated system to take their credit card, or pause and resume. The majority of our customers are choosing to pause and resume the recording after the credit card information is taken. So that same kind of connector, if you will, that allows you to tag all that information, that searchable information, also allows you to stop not only the audio recording, but also the screen recording, which those of you that have screen recording know how valuable it is to be able to see the screen when you're, reviewing calls and not only for compliance but quality. It will actually pause the screen recording as well and resume the screen recording. And so there's a variety of different ways. The desktop analytics to the right, bottom right here. If you have a homegrown application or something that's a little bit older, that's typically how we would use that tool, which actually looks for kind of little bites of information that are getting sent back to the PC, and we pull that information, allows us to know when to stop recording and when to resume. So another best practice that's being adopted more and more is to use speech analytics to identify issues, right? So even beyond just what we covered today in terms of some of the regulations, right? There's litigious statements that agents may be making, right? So worked with a higher education institution where they were guaranteeing certain things, right? So the ability to find agents that are guaranteeing things and taking them off the phones right away to ensure that there's remedial action and they're getting trained properly. Promising things, obviously in healthcare, things like cures cancer, right? Anything that it shouldn't be saying, you can monitor for that. Speech analytics is not 100% accurate, but doesn't have to be. You're going to find example calls where agents are saying this, and you can listen to those right away and take action. So some other examples, and we call them these categories that you would create. That's kind of essentially how speech analytics works. You create these buckets or categories. I like to call them buckets, but you're essentially just trying to bucket all the calls that come in that have these phrases, or a large percentage of these calls. Again, you're not going to get every single one, but unwillingness to help end my shift. It's not my job. That's our policy. That kind of stuff might be an indicator of an agent's unwillingness to help, or lack of knowledge. Right? I don't have a clue. Let me put you on hold. That doesn't always mean they don't know, but it could be a good indicator. And this is kind of from the agent side, like listening to the agent side of the audio. On the customer side of the audio, and depending on your phone system, you can actually look at agent or customer audio. On the customer side, lawsuits, threats, I'm getting a lawyer, Better Business Bureau, I'm going to sue you. Those are just examples of things we would look for when we created a bucket or a category called lawsuit threats. Dissatisfaction, right? One of the big ones, you people, right? We hear that's just like, that's painful to hear, but that's one of the most common ones, that is an indicator of dissatisfaction. Misleading, ridiculous. KPMG just did a recent study on just the word ridiculous alone. If either the agent or the customer said it, the customer was likely to change their insurer within 3 months. So that alone, just looking for that particular word, is huge. Delighted customers, again, it's not an issue, but you don't always just want to look for the negatives, right? It's a compliance-focused webinar, so we're focusing a lot on those kind of things. But, we might want to find really good example calls that we can praise and share with the team and use for training. So thank you for caring. You're awesome. You deserve a raise, things like that. And then this is really kind of the next generation, if you will. So you can set up buckets. We talked about setting up buckets, but think about how many calls you evaluate from a quality monitoring perspective right now. Maybe it's 5 calls per agent per month, 10 calls per agent per month. It's a very small sample, right? So it's if you're actually listening to coachable calls, it can be very valuable. But from a conformance standpoint, we don't like to call it compliance or scripted hearing because, again, speech analytics is not 100% accurate, but it doesn't have to be. So with a scorecard like this, essentially what happens is you can create, buckets or categories, this top section, for things that the agents are supposed to be saying. And you run all calls through this, and you're going to get a score. So in this case, call recording disclaimer, this call may be recorded for quality assurance purposes. Is that okay with you? If you're a two-party state. call recording disclaimer, and verifying contact terms, there's a very good chance that this agent, Stacey Adams, is not doing that correctly. So upon listening, you would drill down, listen to sample calls. Again, you're not going to get everyone, but you're going to get ones where the system thought, yeah, there's a very good chance they did do this. You find 2 or 3, you go bring those to Stacey, and you say, hey, Stacey, you're saying this is a courtesy call. That's not the same as this call may be recorded for quality assurance, right? So, all you need is 1, 2, 3 good examples. You bring that to the agent right away. You're not waiting. The challenge with quality monitoring is often done, sometimes not till the end of the week or till the end of the month, right? You may have heard the term gang monitoring, where we just try to evaluate the calls because we have to at the end of the month. Well, that call could have been from the beginning of the month, and the agent could have been making that same mistake or that same misstatement, if you will, for 20 days before you even got to it. So this way you're actually monitoring in near real time as calls are coming in, and managers can drill down and actually find sample calls. We recommend still having a QA form, and it's going to be a greatly shortened QA form, right, for things like accuracy, product knowledge. It's tough to analyze accuracy with speech analytics, right? What was the accuracy of my response? Are they providing the correct response to questions, things like that? Empathy, active listening. But you get the idea. There's a lot of things that you can actually create buckets for and run all your calls through. So other best practices, and now we're going to get into this is the PCI standard again, and this applies. These best practices apply, the majority of them apply to any organization, to HIPAA as well, right? So these are things that you want to look to do if you're not already doing so. So building and maintaining a secure network, and it's a new work, but you do not use vendor-supplied passwords. So one of the things that we do is we allow you to integrate via Active Directory or LDAP to your group management password system. So you don't have to set up separate passwords. When you log into the call recording or the quality monitor application, you just use your network password. Install and maintain a firewall configuration, which most organizations do. Protect cardholder data. So again, that sensitive information, whether it be credit card information or patient private information, so this is social security numbers, medical history, that kind of information. If possible, you want to pause the recording and resume recording, so you're not capturing it and storing any of that information. You want to encrypt the transmission of cardholder data. So we recommend looking not only for strong data encryption, but also file encryption and watermarking to ensure that the file is authentic. That is now available in some of the more modern call recording tools. Maintaining vulnerability management programs. So use and update your antivirus software. I think that's a pretty common practice. And develop and maintain secure systems and applications. This is where you really have to, with the vendors that you work with and even in-house applications, you really want to have a good process in place. So if you have custom code changes, let's say you have in-house applications that they're reviewed by individuals other than their originating code author, things of that nature. And I know we do that quite extensively when we're testing out our software as well. So that's just something you want to look into. There's some great resources on the PCI and the HIPAA websites as well. So implement strong asset access control measures. So everything should be on a need-to-know basis, right? So another thing is assigning unique IDs to each person, and then restricting physical access to sensitive data. It doesn't have to be video cameras. It's just one of the things, recommend just to see what people are doing from a physical perspective. There's this key card entry systems and all these kind of things that are available out there to restrict physical access to, sensitive cardholder or patient private information. So regularly monitoring and testing networks, right? So one of the things that we built into our call recording and our other tools is an audit log reporting. So just like you can have dashboards in our software and all your call center metrics in real time and see how teams and agents are doing, and maybe you have outsourced providers, you can see everything in that in real time. You can just as easily create a dashboard that has basically the audit log activity. So you can see, unauthorized access, or maybe, how many calls were marked as sensitive that were paused and resumed, logins, logouts, user activations, all kinds of things. If the metrics are available, you can put it here and you can report on this. And then you can push this out to whoever may be interested. So, and then regularly test security systems and processes. That's the 11th requirement or guideline, if you will, of the PCI standards. And then the final one, the 12th one is, and this is so important, I can't stress this one enough, is maintaining a policy that addresses security information. So really making compliance an important part of just your overall training regimen. You guys are all on this webinar now. That's, you're learning about new things, and just making sure everyone else has access to training as well on your policies and procedures related to security and compliance. Regularly conducting security assessments. Again, if you look at any PCI or HIPAA best practice, information, you'll see these kind of suggestions. Set up automated system alerts. So that's one thing we work, a lot with our customers, setting up alerts for certain types of things. If there's any early indicator, right, whether it's from speech analytics and we want to, identify, alert if we see a certain threshold get passed, if one of those category buckets, reaches a certain threshold, let's set up an alert. Or it could be an alert on any of the data. It becomes important to kind of get ahead of these things before anything really bad happens. And then having a disaster breach recovery plan in place, and then testing that out at least annually. So going through what happens if there is a breach, how do we handle things? Because you see breaches happening almost weekly, right? They're coming out in the news all the time. One just happened here locally. I'm in New Hampshire, and it just, it's just a local bank, right? It just happened yesterday. So it's one of those things where you have to have a good disaster recovery plan in place. So then some of the things that we also offer in addition to kind of the compliance aspect, just for ease of administration, peace of mind, is a single unified web-based interface. You don't have to, install software on individual PCs. It's all web-based. Can be hosted behind your network or your private cloud. It's a flexible hub and spoke architecture, and in compliance environments, we tend to have a lot of redundancy where people want kind of redundant backups of all their recordings and things. So we're doing more and more of that today. And the hub and spoke allows you to have kind of a centralized management of everything, but then record things locally. We also offer multi-client. So if you are an outsourcer or you have other kind of parties that you work with and you want to only give them access to their call recordings, you can do that. When they log in, they only have access to that information. Business rules is, again, very powerful. Once you have the data tagged to the call, so right, we're tagging more data to the calls, we're indexing the calls with speech analytics. You can use any of that data to, again, decide how long you want to retain calls for and then automatically purge them. The keep on demand is nice. You probably heard of record on demand, where I'm going to press a button on my phone system, and from that point on, I'm going to start recording, right? Maybe I'm an executive and I want to record. I heard something, I want to record. Keep on demand is actually even cooler. What it allows you to do is, if you hear something that you want, something that you want to record, well, you can actually, when you press the button on the phone system, then what happens, it actually keeps the entire call, and not just from the point where you press the button. You're basically telling it to retain that call, and it's going to just dump every other call that you don't press the button. You can use those rules to schedule reports, and then flagging calls is also a big one. It's kind of the way a lot of people set up alerts is, hey, I want this call flagged. I want it to show up on my dashboard. Certain things are said or certain things happen. You can set up flag calls. And non-proprietary hardware, that's a big one. And then virtually everything we do today in terms of the deployment is done on either some sort of a virtual machine, right? Some sort of existing server will give you the specs. You can provide your own hardware, whether it's Dell or HP or IBM servers or whatever you work with in your organization, and then we'll usually virtualize that as well. All upgrades are included with the platinum maintenance plan, so people love that. It's a huge value just to not have to worry about, new software comes out or something, we need to comply with now comes out. You'll find many times that with other call recording systems like PCI upgrade, for example, could be a completely new system, right? And it could cost quite a bit of money, more than most people actually anticipate. So we try to minimize that with the platinum maintenance plan. Keeping all data when upgrading, so it's important you don't lose the data from your previous version, which happens quite a bit. We see that, or at least people complaining about that. And then we don't charge additional for network storage. So if we can archive to any of your SAN or NAS units to store the recordings and the data. We're not going to charge you extra, to make that connection, which some do. So, and just in conclusion, before we get into the Q&A, just kind of high-level points here. So whether you're recording for compliance or quality assurance, you have to protect the stored data. That's just, important. So pausing and resuming, making sure you're not recording that is very important. There's no such thing as a PCI, HIPAA, or Dodd-Frank compliant product. That's a question we get a lot. Are you PCI, is it a PCI compliant product or HIPAA compliant? It's the organization, it's your organization that becomes compliant through an adherence to the requirements. So compliance it's really, you got to look at it as this cradle to grave process. It's not just, these are, call recording is just one piece of that process. And then we allow you to conform to security standards while supporting your call recording initiatives, and that's the flexibility and the capabilities that we built into the system. So at this point, we'd like to open it up for questions. Let me see. So we have a lot of good questions. So here's a question for Dick. Is PCI compliance the same in Canada, or is this information strictly American?
It's an international standard. It applies as much in Europe or Africa as it does in Canada. It's a standard that's produced by the industry. It's probably important to distinguish between regulations, laws, and standard. There is no federal law in the United States or any other country that mandates PCI DSS compliance. It's an artifact of the organizations, the card brands. Therefore, their enforcement is international. They're just as much concerned about a breach in India as one that would occur in the United States.
Great, thank you, Dick. Another question. Do you know how the compliance audit is conducted?
You're asking me, Patrick?
Yeah. a lot of these are for you.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm not familiar with the details of that. There's a checklist, and I think the checklist is available on the website of what is required for compliance. I believe the way it works, and you may step in on this as well, Patrick, but my understanding is it depends on the number of transactions whether or not a audit is required. If companies with a X number, and I can't remember the exact number of transactions, must submit and must conduct audits. The audits must be done by trained people that are certified to provide the audits. They must be an impartial third party. And, they would go through the checklist, which covers not just what we were talking about in terms of behaviors and storage of information, but network security and equipment and all the aspects of PCI. We're just talking here about the telephony element, but it goes far beyond that. So, that would, I think, answer your question to some degree.
Yeah, that's great. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dick. Here's one. I work for an insurance company that makes outbound phone calls for servicing policies. These are not sales calls. What are the requirements for recording these outbound calls? Do we have to announce that we are recording the call?
Well, let me answer that. In some states, and I know Washington is one of them, and I do believe California may be another, it is required that statement that precedes the call be recorded, so it could be proved. So, for example, these are the consent to record laws, and in most states, one-party consent is fine, but not in every state. And in fact, in some states, all parties, even if it's a conference call, have to consent to be recorded. So, but in the states where it's necessary to record the consent, record that the preamble, that the disclaimer was made, then you do need to record it. So, since an insurance company, unless if you're working nationally, then your customers could be from a state that requires that be recorded. I think also for just your own quality assurance, you would want to check to make sure that statement is being made. It's just so you're not surprised later on. Today it's not unusual for people to you're calling be recording you, and so I've done that from time to time. So you would want to have the proof that you did in fact issue that disclaimer.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I recommend adding it to your quality form, right? So things like, are they saying the correct disclaimer, right? And monitoring for that. Also, a lot of people, disposition codes become more valuable as well. So are they selecting the right disposition code and not just general inquiry? Add that question to the QA form, and you'll find that you're actually going to see agents following that better. Here's a question that I'll take. Would any call recording software be able to pause and resume call recording during credit card information capturing? And the answer is no. Some of the more modern ones, typically if you have an older system, a simple upgrade may not do that. That's why a lot of times it's a forklift upgrade. So we've been in many situations where organizations actually, will look at a new recording system like BPI's because they look at how much that, quote, upgrade will cost, and it's typically a forklift upgrade. But it's definitely worth checking with your provider. And if it is something where it would require a new system, it's definitely worth, looking at other alternatives as well. So not every system will do that out of the box. All right. So, question regarding the TSR, the telemarketing sales rule. Could you clarify the disclosure that must be said to let customers know that it is a sales call, and if the contact was initiated by the consumer, and we do a follow-up call? Is that also bound by the regulation?
Yeah. I'll start with the latter part of that. That's a very good question. There are a number of exemptions. For example, if the call was the result of a advertisement or a catalog call, then obviously that customer is calling the enterprise with the expectation of a sales call to commence. So that it would not necessarily mean that they'd have to certainly continue to conduct the call in the way it should be done with the proper disclosures and everything. But it's not necessary to preface it by saying, well, this is I'm representing so and so, and here's this call will be is a sales call. That's self-evident if you're calling in response to that. In certain cases, let's say the call originates as a service call, you're calling a utility company or cable company, and during the course of the conversation, the agent who's being compensated for this switches into sales mode and advises, well, look, we've got a new package open, available, and we've got this short-term trial, etc. Well, now it becomes a sales call, in which case, all of the provisions of the TSR come into effect. You have to provide all the mandatory information. As far as a outbound telemarketing call, what exactly do you have to say? Well, it's spelled out in the Act. I don't know if I can remember all of them, and I don't think there's not a formal script that's mandated. It's up to every company to develop it. But one thing you must do is explain, and almost promptly, that it is a sales call. The purpose of the call is to raise funds or introduce you to a product or whatever. You must also identify who the caller is, and if it's a third party that's calling on behalf of somebody else, then that needs to be made clear. There's also special rules for telefunders. I mentioned earlier that nonprofits are exempt, but they're not exempt in the sense that they hire a company to go out and collect money for them, in which case that becomes a sales call and they must submit. So the two absolute necessities are that the purpose of the call and who you are. Also, there's requirements to provide the caller ID number. Farther than that, the TSR is online, and if the individual wants to send you an email or something, they're happy to get back with more specific answers or whatever else might be included in that opening statement.
Great, thank you, Dick. So just some additional regarding the disclaimer that this call may be recorded. Is it okay to say it? Do you have to say it at the beginning, or is it okay to say it kind of during pleasantries, like any time throughout the call?
I think the latter would be correct. I think as long as they're told, and in fact they don't have to be told at all. If you're in a environment with one caller identity is okay. Like here in Virginia, where I am, in most states, as long as one party is aware that the call will be recorded, that's sufficient. But I think that conversationally it makes for an easier transaction. But as long as a statement is made, I don't think it has to be made right away. I think most companies do that just to make sure that it gets done.
That's great.